Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. We're going to discuss today a little known, a little talked about, at least in what we'll call the Western world, residency program that may be interesting to some people. It's something that very few people think about, are aware of. It's kind of outside of their kind of space of awareness, maybe because it's kind of like one of those out of sight, out of mind places. However, has a pretty interesting long-term residency permit that leads to permanent residency, potentially to citizenship, and the citizenship is fairly interesting. It's pretty easy to qualify for. So I would compare it somewhat competitively from like just the perspective of the permit standpoint, maybe with something like the Thai Elite Visa. And so we're going to discuss it today. This is the subject of Mauritius. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Mauritius is a small island, I want to say off the coast of Africa, but the reality is it's 2,000 kilometers away. So, you know, we think typically 2,000 kilometers is pretty in general. When you go to southeastern Africa and then you go another 2,000 kilometers, it's really far away. And so it's quite common when you're talking to people from South Africa, it's like a common South African tax haven. And that being said, you know, it's quite a well-known, beautiful island. It's a place that has been popular for offshore banking for quite a long time. I haven't been an enormous fan of it in that respect, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, as well as I'll make some future videos talking about forming companies there and banking, and actually there's some really interesting characteristics of those as well, so we'll talk about that again in a future video. For now, there's a variety of different residency permits. I'm going to focus on one that is based, it's the self-employed residency permit that you can get there, okay? And how does this self-employed residency permit work? So we're going to go through what are the tax implications, what are the minimum stay requirements, how long it will last you for, what are the renewal possibilities, the permanent residency possibilities, the citizenship possibilities, what I think of it in general, the costs, etc. But before we do that, please hit the subscribe button, nail the notification bell, hit the little all notifications. If you'd like help with any of these sorts of subjects, start off by checking out some of our other videos, but we help you with figuring out what is the best solution for you in terms of where to locate, in terms of setting up your company. Maybe you want to stay where you are, but you want to optimize tax. We do international tax optimization, asset protection, payment processing, offshore company formation, bank accounts, helping you get second citizenships, residencies, etc., etc. So please book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or send a message through our websites, offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Now, let's get into it. Okay, so this is pretty easy to qualify for. What you essentially need to do is register as a self-employed person. Now, this shouldn't be confused with, there's another residency permit available in Mauritius where you can invest in a company. It's a pretty reasonable bar to kind of climb above. There's a variety of different ones, an innovative startup or just another company, and there's if you inherit a bunch of different things. But the bottom line is that's separate from what we're talking about here. Today we're talking about the self-employed program. The self-employed program essentially has this criteria. You need to deposit $35,000 into the bank, and you need to have, pay the appropriate fees for filings and obviously go through the process of getting the residency permit, which can be started actually online remotely, which is quite interesting and useful again, because the downside of Mauritius is for most people, it's really far away, right? This being said, you know, if you value good weather and you're interested in a little bit more tropical place, but that is not actually that small. So one of the criticisms you'll often hear me levy against countries such as, you know, Bahamas or Cayman Islands, etc. in the Caribbean is they're really tiny. You have a population maybe 50,000, and what are you going to do there? It's pretty boring. By contrast, Mauritius actually has close to 1.3 million people on it. So relatively large population as compared with a lot of these other ones. You might almost think of it like the Puerto Rico of that part of the world. Okay, so a little bit similar comparison. There is a few different things that makes the tax consequences pretty favorable. First of all, there's no capital gains tax. So for people who are investors who want to use that as their base, their tax residency, that's really great, right? Second of all, you can get foreign income not remitted to Mauritius tax-free, so that's also pretty useful for a bunch of people. It is not on a lot of the blacklists, so it's not generally seen as a terrible jurisdiction in the same way that, BVI or, Seychelles or Belize or something like that is. It's certainly not a whitelisted country. Their network of tax treaties, there's 37 of them, I believe, last I checked, which is, not a ton, and they're not necessarily amazing, although they have places like Belgium and UK, so there are some that are perhaps useful. There's some usefulness in terms of, particularly if you're interested in, being in that part of the world and taking advantage of those taxes. There isn't a minimum stay requirement in order to have the permit, so that's great. It lasts 10 years. So 10 years is a long time, right? You get set up with this residency permit, you can go 10 years. The 10 years can be rolled into a permanent residency, which is actually a 20-year permit, fairly easily. Basically, the criteria is simply that you have to have had income through your business over the last 3 years of 3 million of their Mauritian rupees, which is about 0.25 cents, US cents. So you're talking about approximately, what is that, 75,000 US dollars. So pretty low, right? The standards are pretty reasonable. And they've got a retirement visa there that also you can kind of walk down some of these similar comparables. So in that sense, pretty attractive. Obviously, like I said, good weather, relatively low cost of living. The GDP per capita is actually higher than a bunch of the places in, say, Eastern Europe, et cetera. It's about $11,000 a year. So it tells you, of course, this is mainly from tourism. Something like 75% of their GDP comes from tourism. This being said, it does say something a little bit about the standard of people, but also when you look at the costs, GDP PPP, for those of you who aren't familiar, PPP is purchasing power parity, and basically accounts for the differences in cost of living, raises up quite a bit on the global stage to something more like $25,000 a year. So pretty reasonable in that respect, and tells you a bit about the opportunities there. So certainly not for everybody, but one that I wanted to talk about because it's quite overlooked. The ability to get citizenship is a bit trickier. You need to actually live there for 3 out of the last, I think it is 5 or 7 years. And in the last year, you need to be there for 12 consecutive months, so quite a bit of extra time. And so, there's some trickiness around getting that citizenship. This being said, if you actually can get that citizenship, it's kind of interesting. I wouldn't call it an exceptionally great passport, but it's one that fills in a lot of holes of some others. So for example, it includes Japan, it includes China. It's one of the very few that includes both China and Russia. Almost no passports in the world have that, but it does. Like I said, it has Japan. It actually, interestingly, has New Zealand, though it doesn't have Australia, Canada, the US, Mexico, etc. But it does have a lot of the African countries that you would normally not get with a particular residency permit. So yeah, this is an interesting option, I think, for what you might call one of these residencies that you can kind of leave and set and forget, right? That, again, it's easy to qualify for, why not? If you're actually in a position where you ever need to use it, especially as an investor, you can take advantage of it pretty well. Again, I'll do some videos in the future talking about the companies there. They did some changes over the last several years. They used to have something called GBC1, GBC2, and they changed it to something called GBL, combined together and made some different things to comply with the OECD's Base Erosion Profit Shifting Initiative. But anyway, the whole point is there's some interesting possibilities with those companies for the right type of business, of course. It's not something that we use too often. With respect to their banking, because one of the cool things, I guess, is that when you're getting a residency permit there, it's going to enable you to bank in Mauritius. There are actually quite a few banks in Mauritius, and it's been fairly popular as an offshore destination for banking for quite a while. Although generally you'll have banks like ABC Bank that are really not particularly high quality banks. You often have issues. And more kind of challenging has been the fact that generally the banks in Mauritius have required introducers. So you've had banks like Afrasia, etc. And so if you don't have an introducer, you weren't able to get into those. This being said, if you're looking for an alternative jurisdiction that is kind of away from everything else, this might be interesting for you, right? I've talked to some people lately who, one of the things they'll say about a jurisdiction, I was talking to somebody who's moving to Paraguay and said, what everybody hates about it is what they like about it. I often talk to people about, if there's to be a war or something, they'd rather be able to go to some place like New Zealand, which is really far away from everything else and has kind of a perceived safety. You might make a similar argument about Mauritius, right? It's really far away from most parts of the world and therefore has a certain perceived safety to it. So take it for what you will. Let me know what you think. Do you think that this is an interesting program? Do you think that it's an interesting country? Have you thought about it before, etc.? What are the things you would like? What are the things you would dislike? Put them in the comments below. We'd love to hear. Again, if you want help making decisions about where to go, what programs might be best for you in your particular situation, etc., please reach out to me. You can book a call at comedy.com/Michael-Rosmer. Happy to help you get second citizenships, tax optimization, forming companies, open bank accounts, all that kind of stuff. And send a message to our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com. Hit the subscribe button. I'm going to see you guys on the next video.